This is Professor Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work. I'm responding to a recent show of Fox and Friends, where they went out of their way and out of the discipline of economics in order to try to save something from the sad fact that's circulating that the refunds people are getting for their 2018 tax filings are smaller or non-existent compared to what they had been led to expect by the hoopla promoted by President Trump and the GOP when they passed the big tax cut in December of 2017. It's a sad reality when your politics is so much a promise of tax cuts and tax cuts that when you finally see the dust clear, an awful lot of the people you promised tax cuts to and refunds to didn't get them. The statistics are crystal clear. The tax cut favored large corporations and wealthy people, whose tax cuts, as is usually the case, were very large, and for the mass of the people, they were very modest. When you add to that lobbyists overwhelmingly paid by what? The same groups, large corporations and wealthy individuals, were busy making adjustments and changes in the tax code, many of which had the consequence of undoing for workers and for middle-income people whatever the tax cut on the big scale had accomplished, leaving them with little or no benefit at all. And so Fox and Friends, as they often do, tried to figure out some way to make this sound reasonable. And in the process, they actually made it worse. Besides saying things that weren't correct, which others have pointed out, and I don't need to repeat, I was struck particularly by the sad display of a claim that the problem faced by people in high state and local tax jurisdictions, because there's a limit on how much you can deduct, $10,000 a year, that those kinds of people who pay local, state taxes are going to be hurt. They're not going to get a refund because whatever tax cut they got is lost by being unable to deduct the taxes they pay to local and state governments. And then the amazing remark made by somebody presented as an economist was that that's their fault, you see. They shouldn't have such high taxes. This is the same mentality as to get Fox and Friends into trouble all the time. In order to assess what a tax is or does and what our attitude toward it ought to be, you have to ask two questions. Who pays it, and what are the benefits that flow from it? The states in question that charge high taxes provide their citizens with a massively greater amount of public services, quantity and quality, than do states who don't tax. That's as old as Methuselah. You'd have to evaluate the program of public spending relative to the taxes in order to make a judgment, which Fox and Friends obliterated doing. Last thing that blew my mind was the use of the state of Mississippi as an example of what the states like California and New Jersey and Illinois and New York that are high state and local tax states, what they ought to do. Now that takes a level of craziness that even I found overwhelming. Mississippi, like New Mexico, is in a constant race for being the poorest, most underdeveloped economic state out of the entire 50. That it is put forward as a model requires a blindness that is even far-fetched for Fox. And finally, as every study done by reasonable economists has shown, we as a nation subsidize many of our poorer states, which tend to be the ones that tax less, by shifting federal funds from states that pay more, like every one of those that taxes its own people higher, to help out, which is what a nation ought to do, the states that need it. If you put together the public services provided by the federal government, directly and indirectly, to Mississippi, then it is a state that gets a net subsidy from the very other states that pay in. there ought to be some understanding and reciprocity. Putting Mississippi forward as an example for the other states reflects a desperate need to spin that has left behind every reasonable basis of economic analysis. This is Richard Wolff for Democracy at Work.